and now I'd be happy to answer whatever questions you have about anything related to the document.
Thanks. Appreciate your presentation, Secretary Flynn, and also Katie Roberts. I guess we can start off with, down here to the right, we'll start off with James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, my question is, to what degree are you planning on increasing the stipulated penalties? Because if I remember correctly, the fines were a major complaint from the original 2005 consent order. And as we heard earlier from the trip to Washington, basically the House said that for fiscal year 2017 that there's no more money. So that's a concern for me, that if you're planning on increasing these stipulated penalties and there's no more money, what's going to happen then?
Sure. Mr. Chair, James, that's a great question. I don't know what we're going to increase them to. We're not, there's, certainly there's the assessment of penalties versus the, what the penalties are. And so right now what we're talking about is what the penalties will be going forward. Currently in the 2005 document, it's a $1,000 penalty for the first 30 days, and then per day for the first 30 days, and then $3,000 penalty per day from days 30 to
31 through whenever.
Is there a cap? Do we have a cap? No, so it's different than our hazardous waste policy. Okay, but it's 1 and 3 is the spread right now. I don't know what it would increase, what an increase would look like. I think that'll depend on our conversations. I agree with you, though. We don't want to see, like I said before, if we're in a position where we're finding the department, then something's not working. And so we certainly don't want to, the goal isn't to fine. I mean, the goal is to get work done. And I think people kind of miss that point a lot of times. They want there to be a fine. And fines don't lead to, I don't think that fines, there's a direct correlation between fines and budget. I think that what we've seen in the past is that fines can hurt budget. What leads to, in my opinion, more budget is clearly articulated plans and successful action with respect to implementing those plans. Because people like to fund winners versus funding a loser, throwing money down the drain. So, but I do think that there has to be some pressure and some consequence for a failure to actually comply with the document, and fines are really the hammer that we have to try to drive action. So it's not a perfect system, and government entities, though, I think respond differently to fines than private entities. Whereas fines are very effective with a private actor, they're not as effective with government actors. And so, I think it's not perfect. If you can give me a better tool that I could use, I'm all ears. Like I said, the document is still in draft. We have plenty of time, so I'm not being disingenuous at all. I'm serious. If you've got some good ideas, I think we're all ears.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Max? You're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Secretary and Katie. So the question I have is, since you review the whole comments that were submitted, of the 12, looked like 6 were for organizations, 6 from individuals. Was there a common thread that identified problematic areas within the CO and therefore could significantly change the CO?
Mr. Chair, no, I don't think there was one common thread. I think there was among the communities, the local government entities, and as well as like the federal regulators, I think there was a strong bias toward action versus characterization. And so I think that the common thread I've heard from the local government entities and the sovereigns has been, and some individuals, like Mr. Alquist's comment we heard. I mean, I think he was someone who worked in the government side, was an activist, participated at all different ends, and I think he was very vocal in his comments about all this money is being spent, so much is wasted on process and not enough is spent on actually cleaning up problems. And I think that was kind of, I said, here, I'm with you. So I think that was the one common thread, was that there's a strong desire to have more money being spent on cleanup than on talking about cleanup. So I think that's one common thread that we've heard. There was another common thread was on, there was just, among, there's certainly objections on the activist community side about, on public participation, what that means. And I also think that who is the public? I think that's a difficult, anyone that tells you they speak for the public, to me is being disingenuous, because I've been around the public enough to know that no single voice reflects the public's view, and it doesn't matter. I mean, whether I'm in Los Alamos County, whether I'm in the city of Santa Fe, whether I'm in Santa Clara, Pueblo, there's so many different perspectives even in that region, and then when you start going outside of a particular region, you have different perspectives as well. So I think there was a common thread about, hey, we want you to treat this document like a permit, not like a consent order. And I think that's not going to influence me. It's not a permit, it's a consent order, and we're going to move forward in the manner that the department did in 2005, and we're going to keep doing that. But I think that's kind of getting back to the first point, is that's like a lot of fighting about process, not really talking about the substantive issues with cleanup. So I think, but no, I think some of the comments too about, with respect, there was a lot of comments or discussion about how the appendices interact with one another. And I think some really good feedback we heard from a number of different sources. One common thread was on the desire to make sure that there's very clear, there's transparency in what work is being proposed each and every year, and as well as transparency and accountability in what happened in the prior year. And I think that's great. I think we absolutely agree with that point, just like we did with the first point, that there's a bias toward action. We think there should be a bias toward accountability. That's been another, I think, common thread we've heard, especially from different community leaders, was we want there to be, we want to know how money is being spent, and we want to know what work was done last year. And I think a lot of different groups would like to know, okay, Department of Energy, you got $190 million last year. How much did you spend on your just administrative overhead? How much did you spend on employing people to drill monitoring wells, to install treatment systems, to do soil remediation, to actually do work, to get out there and start doing stuff? How much did you spend on legal fees? And that type of breakdown is something I think a lot of different people have asked for, because they'd like to know, all right, $190 million, that sounds like a decent amount of money. Where did it go last year? And so I think we agree, that's a very fair request. And I think that's something that we're seriously interested in trying to address in the document going forward. But that's kind of, did I miss any threads? There's a diversity of viewpoints all over the place on particular items and where we can go. And we also, in addition, we've had some good conversations with our, just kind of good questions and good discussion with our congressional representation. And I think they want to figure out they want work accelerated. I'm not saying they agree with everything in the document. They had a lot of good questions. But I think we all agree on, we want to accelerate cleanup, and they want to be armed with as much information as possible so they can advocate for the budget. And so I think there's been, it crosses party lines. Everyone agrees. We want to get more work done, and we want to get more money. So I think that's good.
Second question I have is July, August. Thank you for the explanation. July and August, you're trying to bring it back. Who has to finally sign off on that final consent order for it to then become an executable artifact or document?
So I have to sign, and the Department of Energy has to sign. So I sign on behalf of my agency. So it's me and DOE. Now there's some specific details in terms of signatories that I'm not going to kind of get into, but generally that's, once I sign the state, I'm signing and I'm done. On DOE side, we're still in a discussion about whether the department and the contractor that manages the site should be signatories, or whether it should just be the two government agencies, the state, the Environment Department and the Department of Energy. And that's an open issue. We, in our proposal, the proposed document we have, we're trying to account for the reality that there's a procurement process that's about to take place. There's a bridge contract in place now. There'll be a new contractor take over the environmental remediation site at the site in 2 years. The new contractor, 18, yeah, in 2018 they'll be in place. So they're not. So we don't know who it is yet. But what we proposed was that once they've got that contractor in place, that they would then be added to this document. And the department, I think has a different perspective on that issue, and we just need to talk more about it. I think I understand the department's position. I think it's something we just need to kind of talk more about and figure out. But that's kind of basically who the signatories are. Right now, it's just it would be the Department of Energy and the Environment Department.
Thank you, and they should, if we go through all this process and has been open and transparent, then I think whoever the new entity coming in to manage that should understand that these are binding, I view as binding contract, and therefore when you're bidding on it, you're already agreeing to those set terms and not trying to say, hey, we won the bid, we want to go back and renegotiate every contract. So, thank you.
I think that's good, and I would point out, there's some really good contractors who have outstanding track records who are closely following this. There may even be one or two of them sitting in the audience right now, representatives. So I can tell you that they are very closely tracking this because they're going to bid on it. They need to know what they're getting into. So I do think that I think there's going to be some good competition to do this work, and I think the people that are competing are very closely following this. I can promise you that. They've come in and met with us and asked us about it. So I think you're right on, and I think the contractors are with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thanks. Mona, you have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, and I'm sorry, this question may have been asked when I stepped out, and if it was, I apologize. What is done with any penalty money that is collected? I know we've been told before, but can you refresh my memory?
Yeah, no problem. I'll be real quick.
There's
the Hazardous Waste Emergency Fund that is by state law designated as the recipient of any fines that are collected by the state after a penalty is assessed. Now, we can utilize a supplemental environmental project in lieu of, which would allow money that is collected in the form of a penalty to be spent directly back in the community, and that's what we did for the violations for the whip drum release. We rather than having all that money go into the state account, we went to go right back into the community. But that's generally how it works. If you don't utilize a supplemental project, then it would go into this thing called the Hazardous Waste Emergency Fund that's administered by my agency and has specific statutory uses that you're allowed. We're not allowed to just use it for whatever we want. We have to use it to respond to a hazardous emergency.
Stephen?
I had sort of two questions. One was similar to Max's, but the other one is in this handout you gave us. It says the consent order for the 2005 document is an enforceable legal document under which the three parties are required to fully determine the nature and extent of contamination at LANL, identify and evaluate corrective measures, and to implement such corrective actions. That seems to me that's a very succinct and clear statement about what was to be accomplished. And in looking at the current consent order, I don't think it has such a strong statement about what's expected. And I would urge that. I'll put it in writing maybe. And the other thing is, this statement specifically included the contractor, which was the University of California, or its successors. And so my question was really, what was the role of the contractor? And you've already answered that, so thank
Great.
you.
So I think we'll look at the purpose and scope section that we have in the current document, and we'll certainly take another look at that to make sure that we're being clear about what the purpose is. And hopefully, this document is trying to be different in that most of the characterization work at this point should be done, and we should be moving toward more active remediation.
And is the new document an enforceable legal?
Absolutely. Until, I mean, right now, it's the old document, the 2005 is an enforceable legal document. It's still in place. But as soon as we can agree on a revised document, then that is it's a contract, is exactly what it is. It's a settlement agreement. But settlement agreement is considered a contract, and it's enforceable legal. That's why we're talking about penalties. It's got all the same bells and whistles, just updated.
Anything else, Stevie?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Carlos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions, just a quick comment. I think it's important to not only have a consent order executed as quickly as possible, but to have some end dates on that as well. Because when it comes to funding in DC, as Brian and Andrea could probably attest to this, specifically in Department of Energy, when you have an enforceable legal document, those are the areas around the country that are going to be funded first and fully and adequately. And so the sooner we can get a consent order with end dates, the better. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos. Nona?
Thank you. I have a bunch of questions and comments. First, this is for the people from DOE as well as Secretary Flynn. Would there be more accountability and public access to information if the next contractor were from the public sector rather than from the private sector as the current LANL contractors are? I also had a question about what exactly does it mean that the consent order is an enforceable legal document when it kind of doesn't, I mean, fines are assessed, but it doesn't actually get enforced. How can we, the people, actually make them clean it up thoroughly enough and on time? The order is there, but it expired, it kind of goes on, and
How is it enforced, Nona?
well, it was supposed to be done by 2015. It wasn't, and and therefore this process. And fines were assessed, and as you said, things have happened, such as $2 million turning into $600,000, donated to somebody or other somewhere else. So I can understand why a lot of the, general public individuals, as well as oversight, public organizations that are trying to provide oversight feel uncomfortable with this. I'm not sure what, what the solution means, but, when you say an enforceable legal document, that makes you feel like, well, that means it should really be done. But
I guess I'm still struggling with how isn't it being done, Nona? I'm still struggling with that. I understand what some watchdog groups have said, and I could specifically respond to why I disagree with that statement. But what do you mean? I get so it was supposed to be done in 2015. It's not. There was a $54 million fine that was assessed and a $74 million settlement. I mean, I don't know. Like, and that was the largest settlement in the history of the United States. So what more could happen than the largest settlement in the history of the United States? I get, like, that's enforcement. Now, what I want is, I don't want to be assessing big record settlements. I want to be seeing deadlines met and work get done. So I share your that's what I want to see.
That's what I mean. It's enforceable in the sense as you could charge somebody some money. How can, and this may not be an answerable question, and I don't expect that it will be answerable today, but how can we ensure that it actually gets done? And I feel like that's what a lot of individuals in the public, as well as watchdog organizations, are concerned about. Like, there was an enforceable legal order, but it didn't happen, and it, so how do we, actually make it more likely that more of it gets done?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, I don't know if there's an answer to that question. Let me tell you what my perspective is. I think that's a great question. Let me tell you about what we've done that's worked and where it hasn't worked. I've heard a lot from watchdog groups, for example, about nothing's been happening up at Los Alamos for the past couple of years, since the Martinez administration came into place, for example. There may or may not be a lawsuit that was filed about that. What we did under the 3706 True campaign, so that's not under the consent order, but it's disingenuous to ignore all of that work, because you can't there's a technical jurisdictional issue with respect to transuranic waste and why that's not encompassed in the consent order, which deals with hazardous waste. But you cannot clean up the stuff you're required to clean up, such as Area G up at Los Alamos. You can't clean that up until you've addressed the transuranic waste. And so what we did was put in place a campaign, the 3706 campaign. And some say that's unsuccessful. I wouldn't view it as a success because we didn't complete the mission. But I would say that you're lost if you don't see what happened. And what happened was that there was over 40,000 picocuries of material in place, which measures the radioactivity at the site when that started. And there was less than 500 right now from the True Waste campaign. So you saw 93% of the material at risk get removed from Los Alamos during that campaign. That is a huge amount of radioactive material sitting up in Los Alamos that has been moved out of Los Alamos. Now, there were problems that were very well documented that caused there to be a drum that exploded down at the WIP facility. I would suggest, and I think that there's been a bunch of different investigations, none have suggested that the campaign approach is responsible for that. There were some managerial lapses that occurred where people mixed incompatible materials when they were given clear guidance not to do that. But the fact of the matter is, in a short period of time, a huge amount of radioactive material that you have to absolutely remove from the facility in order to do the cleanup under the consent order was removed. And so that was why we tried to take what we learned from that process and incorporate it here. Because you were right. I mean, fundamentally, the challenge is, how can you, we set deadlines. Deadlines aren't met. And it's not just New Mexico. I mean, you look all across the complex. There are deadlines set and deadlines that fall by the wayside. And I think your question, which you previewed, there's probably, if we had a silver bullet, I'd share it with you right now. I think what we're trying to do is to get toward that same goal, which is so that we don't set deadlines and then be having the same conversation 10, 15 years from now. I'm not sure that I can tell you that there's one single silver bullet. What I can tell you is that when we did this campaign approach for the 3706 campaign, we removed a huge amount of radioactive material from Los Alamos. We made the community much safer as a result of that. We didn't complete it. That still burns me. I want that that campaign completed, and we will. As soon as WIP gets reopened, we will complete that. But that strategy and that approach did lead to some major results. And so that's what we're trying to do. But you're right. I think the fundamental question you're raising is true, that deadlines get set, and they haven't been satisfied here and in other places. And I think we're trying to, what we've tried to suggest here, which is a departure from what's been suggested earlier, is there to be closer scrutiny and much more of an emphasis on what happens in the near term, in years 1, 2, and 3, than on what happens 10, 20 years from now. And so that's the new approach we're trying. And I hope that we're not having a conversation there, or people in our positions aren't having a conversation 10, 15 years from now talking about why that approach failed. But that's what we're trying to do, is to figure out a different way to do this that can get more results. And you're right, I'm frustrated just like you are that deadlines get set and they get broken, and deadlines should mean something.
Thank you. I do have some more questions. One is, Secretary Flynn mentioned a concern about helping ensure, well, based on public comments, helping ensure that a future administration, I'm assuming you meant in the state of New Mexico rather than federal government.
Oh, either one. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Or both.
Yeah.
But, might change their priorities. What helped, so kind of anticipating that possibility, what helped or hindered continuity with attempting to meet the goals of the 2005 consent order, transitioning from the Richardson administration to the Martinez administration?
Well, I think that the department as a whole struggled with defining kind of where we're going short-term and long-term with respect to prioritizing work across the site. And so we were, I think that that leadership needs to provide a direction, and then we need to have the resolve to stick to that approach. And so I think what we didn't do in the past was really identify what we want to see happen in the next year and the next 5 years from a work perspective. And I think that what we did do well under the prior administration was there was a lot of good investigation and characterization work that was done. So I don't think that there's difference in administrations in terms of what we want versus what the Richardson administration. It doesn't matter. Both sides want cleanup, and there's no political difference there. It's not like one wants it and one doesn't. There's just different ways of doing it. And so I do think that there was the prior administration was, I think that a mistake that they made that I wouldn't repeat, and it's not just them. I've seen other entities with major cleanup challenges do the same exact thing. And that is that by setting a deadline for remediation before you've completed the investigation. And so, I have to kind of think of things in terms that I understand, but it would be like me telling you that I'll mow your lawn for $10 and it will take me an hour to do it without having come and seen your lawn. And if your lawn's like my lawn, that's easy, no problem. If your lawn, I have rocks, I have xeriscaping. So if your lawn is huge, you don't know. And like that example, it's true though. Like here, what we said was in 10 years we're going to clean up this whole mess. But we didn't understand the extent of what we were even dealing with. And so I do think that decision put everyone at a disadvantage at the beginning. I'm not saying that it's wrong to set deadlines and set milestones. I am saying that, and Doug has a very extensive remediation history, and I think, and there's many other people in the room who've worked on these problems, and typically you define you kind of set a time frame for investigating and characterizing a problem. And once you've done that, once you've completed the investigation, then and selected the remedies, then you select the deadline. And that didn't occur here. And so I think that put the Richardson administration, whoever, at a disadvantage in achieving the deadline because they set a deadline before they knew what the heck they were dealing with. Nobody knew in 2005, we didn't know, at least the agency, that there was groundwater contamination from chromium at the time. And so you've got Alex next to you, he deals with water contamination, he can tell you how difficult, I mean, cleaning up a extensive groundwater contamination plume in 10 years, I mean, could you do that? I'm not sure if any amount of money would put you in a position where you could technically achieve that type of goal. It's like, so groundwater cleanup is inherently more difficult than, soil if you're dealing with some contamination in the surface. So I think that's one issue that the prior administration grappled with in this document, was that they set a date before they understood the problem. And I think for us, we benefit from the work that's been done to investigate and characterize the problem because we have a much stronger understanding today. So even though we haven't seen the amount of work that we want done on cleaning up the problem, we do have a strong grasp of what the problem is. And I think that puts us in a stronger position to turn toward more active remediation and better analyzing where we go in the future from a cleanup perspective. But again, I'm really hopefully not suggesting that one administration cares, one doesn't. I don't think that at all. I think they cared, and they had some challenges that they faced, and we're just trying to learn from that. Is really what I think what I hope we're doing.
And Nona, I would only add really quickly that having been in the position in both administrations implementing this document, I can absolutely attest to what the Secretary just said, which was, the purpose of the 05 order was slightly different. I mean, even Stephen alluded to, hey, there's this clear purpose statement. Yeah, we did a lot of great investigation, and we had to figure out what was going on up there over the last 10 years, but it put us in a really bad position in 2004 and 2005 for us to say, well, yeah, we think everything's going to be absolutely done in 10 years. And I think the other really important takeaway is that in the 05 document, it really didn't, the schedule in there was not a risk-based approach to work up there, okay? That's a really critical point and takeaway message here. The new document allows for that prioritization of work. And not that it was necessarily a bad thing because they had a lot of investigation that needed to happen in 05, and so it was very deliverable driven. But we're beyond that now. And so now we have an opportunity to say, okay, we're going to list out priorities based on factors, especially related to risk.
And like deliverables, and I'll be really quick, deliverables versus remediation. Like when you talk about deliverables, we're really talking about documents like investigation reports. Like that's, and at the time, and there are deliverables that are still going to continue to come in that are important. So I'm not saying we just throw those all out the window. But this is moving toward a much broader scope where it's not really focused entirely on deliverables and on exchanging documents and reports and submitting paper back and forth. There are, under a work plan approach, which is what we're using, that has enforceable deadlines associated with those work plans. The work plan will include deliverables, but it will also include actual work, like drilling and monitoring well, doing active remediation. And so I think that is a difference in what we're proposing now versus what was proposed in the past.
And it sounds like you are thinking of ways to make sure the transition in 2018 is smooth, and that the projects and continue even when the governor's administration changed. Another comment, please don't discount the comments from members of the public that might look like cut and paste, because I think there are a lot of people out there who are concerned and know what they're concerned about, but just aren't quite sure how to say it. So if if they see in writing something, that's available, and they say, yeah, that's what I mean, and those are the legal points in this document that might seem kind of overwhelming, and they just kind of sign on to that or say it. It doesn't mean that their concern isn't legitimate or isn't, their real true opinion. It's just that they feel a little inarticulate, and so when they see something in writing, they might just use that and send it in because it seems well said, or they think that's the way, you're supposed to say it if you're concerned about that thing.
We consider all the comments, Nona, but I do think that you don't have to be articulate for us to consider your input. That's my point, is that, I've received letters from elementary school students who their grammar may not have been the greatest, but they were able to kind of put their heart and their feelings on a piece of paper without, they didn't understand RCRA, they didn't cite RCRA, they just talked about, hey, this is important to me, and said it, and we take all of that into account. And so even if a member of the public just wants to say, hey, I want to make sure, just however they want to say it, we're going to listen. And I don't think you should fall into a trap. All I'm saying is, when I get the same, if I get 2 sentences from someone saying, hey, it's really important, I'm really worried about impacts from this site on my water, on my drinking water system. And I really want you to hold the department accountable and to push toward cleaning that up. You don't need to tell me. I mean, I'll take that absolutely into account. I'm not saying we don't need the Gettysburg Address. We don't need a 10-page letter with certified mail. We really are trying to be as open as possible. Like I said, I've received comments on issues on a piece of notebook paper from an elementary school student that we have absolutely considered, and that meant something, meant a great deal to me. So we don't discount cut and paste comments, but if a cut and paste comment talks all about how this is a permit, and Secretary Flynn, you're ignoring the legal requirements and focusing on like these really arcane and totally incorrect legal arguments, I think that we'll consider it, but they're giving weight to a flawed legal argument rather than, to me, you could just say from the heart, hey, I want you to protect my drinking water. I'm worried. And that is something that we're going to consider all of them, but you don't have to write us like a 10-page legal document for us to take your viewpoint into consideration. And something as simple as, I'm worried about radioactive isotopes impacting me, my food, my garden. Well, look at that. Like that's meaningful, and it doesn't have to be perfect or legally based. It could come from the heart, and we'll take that into account.
Well, thank you very much. That's good to know, and it's good for the public who may be here or may look at this online or in the archives or something to know about as well. And what about the public versus private contractor thing and transparency and accountability?
So are you talking about like having because in the past there was a University of California. Are you kind of, is that what you mean by public?
Yes, not necessarily going back to University of California, but there were major changes that happened at LANL when the contract switched from the public sector to a private sector for-profit entity. Some people thought it was great because gross receipts taxes came rolling into Los Alamos County, but a lot of people who work at LANL and a lot of things in Los Alamos County and a lot of people who live in Los Alamos County at the rest of LANL, besides the environmental management part, had a lot of changes and a lot of them were not for the better, and it seems like there's even less transparency, even less public access, even less of the feeling that that people, even people who work there, can know what's going on. and can say anything about it. So as this new contract is coming up for bid, is that a consideration? You know,
I can't answer, not for us to.
and
Well, all I would say is we really have, I mean, it's not for us to, I have no part in selecting the contractor for the site. So, and this really would be inappropriate for us to have a preference beyond whoever it is that they work hard and get work done. The only thing that I would add is that, and I'm not discounting what you're saying at all. I'm just, it's really for us, our job is to work with whoever's there and to make sure that they do the work that needs to be done. That's really our role. We don't participate in the contracting process, and that would be, nor would we want to. I don't think it's appropriate, and I certainly would not want to be in that role. But, you know, I do think there is that whoever is there needs to utilize whenever appropriate, you know, local contractors if they can do the work effectively as well. And that's not just because I'm biased toward employing New Mexicans. I do think that there's value in having people who live here who are directly invested in the work that they're performing. And so I would just, like, that's my only, and I think that private contractors and public universities both share that viewpoint, that when they can find a good local contractor to do work, I hope that they will utilize them, because those are people who live here. It's their community, and I think you're going to fight harder when you're on your own turf, protecting your family, than you are when you're on someone else's turf. That's my only thought, is that I do hope that as a new contract is in place, that they are absolutely making sure that the people who are doing the work are qualified, and whenever possible, we're utilizing people who live here and are from here, they're doing the work for themselves and their family, not just for a paycheck. And I don't even know how Doug could even, I mean, it's a procurement process. I don't even know what you can say.
I'll talk a little bit more about this in my update. But just to start here is, the things that you cited with the transition, when you talk about transparencies, they're not a factor on whether it's a private or a public organization that's doing it. Either one will succeed or fail depending on what Ryan is talking about, is making sure that the expectations are clear on what you're supposed to be doing, and then holding accountable for them to get done. And that's what we're talking here. So those examples that you're talking, you know, whether organization is transparent or not, the private organizations can be transparent, public organizations can be transparent. So it's a matter of how it's executed. And so which mechanism is used, whether it's a private or a public, that is up to, of course, the Department of Energy, but then holding them accountable for getting the work done. And one of the things, just like Ryan's talking about, you know, I see here that sometimes folks look and you talk we versus they. I'm part of the we. I live in Los Alamos. So does my contractor counterpart, Randy Erickson, back there. And we care about this here. And I love this job, because this is the first job that I've had in 20 years where everybody cares about what we're doing and wants to get it done. Some folks may not like the nuclear weapons program, but we're talking environmental cleanup here. So, you know, Secretary Flynn, the CAB, Regional Coalition, the county, us and the Department of Energy all care to clean it up. So the real question is, how quickly do you clean it up, to what degree? And that's where we're trying to get to this point. The consent order, and then Secretary Flynn and you folks have told us time and again, what's that life cycle baseline to clean up? Because I'll go back into, you asked a question about, you know, that you asked Secretary Flynn. He said, I don't really have the answer. Well, the answer really is, it's a matter of funding. Once we go and identify what needs to be done, then the how clean is clean and how quickly you clean it up is based on the funding you receive. You know, you're looking on, you know, I go back to the original motion that was voted on here, right? The question of adequate funding for the CAB, okay? And all of you said, of course we should have adequate funding. And the real question is, what is adequate funding? And who gets to make that determination? For cabs at each site, it's the site management. It's me. And And so that's one of the things, working with the CABs, you identify what is the task, what are the things need to be done, and then you decide to fund them. Okay, let's take that to now the cleanup. We don't make the determination on the cleanup, Congress does. President suggests, but Congress is the one that appropriates. So I will disagree with Carlos to a little, environmental degree, like the consent order, do not dictate to Congress how much appropriations they give. Andrea talked back there about going to the House, the House Representatives, and said there is no money. And so my experience in 20 years is that Congress, if you had an unreasonably large amount of funding required as an environmental agreement, you know what they're going to tell us? We need to go back and undo that agreement because you're still not going to get the money. And so the issue is that we're talking about here, and Secretary Flynn says, is we have to perform. You take the money that you get, you transparently show, here's what we're going to do, and you deliver on that. And then there's the Government Performance Results Act. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's where Secretary Flynn's talking about pay for performance. Those programs that are performing should get additional funds. I can't lobby Congress. That's for all of you out there to go back and show Congress the reason more money should be coming to this place for cleanup is because we're using it wisely. And the only way you can do that is for us to be transparent. And there's nothing that we do that is classified, so there's no reason why we can't do that. And right now, you cite examples of where we haven't been transparent, and we have to change that. Because it's you folks who should be the ones who go back to Congress. You, the regional coalition, the county, the congressional delegations go back there and determine how much we get done because you're the ones who have the influence on how much money we get. But in the meantime, my job is to make sure that we deliver on those things that we have funding for.